Colonization comes from the root word colon, which was Christopher Columbus's real name. Hence, you get the word colonialism. So to decolonize your mind means to get at the root of all the drama and issues that we see in this world. To deprogram ourselves from the programming that has been done to us. Okay? And this man has been part of that journey. Please hit the lights for me. You know who I'm about to bring out, right? Can I hear a rise up? Rise up! Rise up!
You symbolize the voice of truth all around the world in the name of rap music and hip hop.
If I was somewhere else simply because of the music I made, then there was nowhere it couldn't take me.
Can I have a platform where I can still be me, tell my truth, and make some money so I can take care of my life? There's a reason a nigga picks his pen up.
Immortal Technique is one of the most dangerous artists in America.
We moved to Harlem in the 80s. I used to get into fights all the time. I didn't realize what the prison industrial complex was. When I began to learn and understand things about the world, I was set free.
Whenever you got awakened, you took this journey.
Hit them lights. Put your hands together for Immortal Technique.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing? I love seeing things like this because it reminds me of when I was your age. I was not the person in the front row paying attention. I was the guy in the back making jokes. I was the dude that pretended he was looking somewhere, but he was really looking down at like a Game Boy or something. That was a video game system, a really, really old one, you know what I mean? They used to have to blow in the cartridge and then put it in the system. There were no little DVDs you put in your video game system. One of the things that I never talk about, aside from all the music I made, all the countries that I've been to, is that I became a citizen of the United States when I was 17 years old. And before that, I immigrated here from a country called Peru in South America. I was born in el Hospital Militar de Lima. And I want to express something important to you so you have some idea of why I and my family eventually came here. Peru was experiencing at the time 1,200% a year inflation. Now, for people who don't study economics and don't understand exactly what that means, it's basically as if you went to the store with $100 one day and they say that $100 isn't worth $100, it's worth $10. And then the next week you come back and you say, hey, I got $10, and they say, hey, I'm sorry, that $10 is not even worth 50 cents. You come back the next week with 50 cents and they say, what is this worthless metal that you're putting in front of me? You might as well have a handful of bottle caps. That doesn't mean anything. Aside from this horrific inflation in which people couldn't get a job, and if you one day end up reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, you'll read some very important note that adds to this and puts it into perspective. He said the American Revolution, this country that we're living in now, the only reason that the revolution was possible, one of the biggest reasons, is that a wagon load of money could no longer purchase a wagon load of supplies. Empires don't fall because they lose wars. We haven't won a war since World War II. Empires fall because people stop believing in them, because the central government is no longer trustable, because no matter what they say, you think to your head, they must be lying to me. They lie about everything. There was no faith in the Peruvian government at that particular time. There was a war between Maoist guerrillas, the Shining Path, and right-wing paramilitary troops supported by the CIA. So in order to find peace and quiet, my father decided to move us to Harlem in the 1980s. Harlem, New York, though, was very different than Peru. Obviously, it wasn't as poor, but it still had a lot of poverty and a lot of violence. But what it also had is a beautiful blossoming art form called hip-hop that people thought was a fad and a joke at that particular time. Because mind you, I came here in 1981, before a lot of your teachers was born. Real shit. The reality is this, that when I examine this situation and I step back And I thought about the difficulty that it takes to move from one place to another. And the fact that my mother didn't even speak English. And now she has 2 master's degrees from Fordham University. She speaks 3 languages. And I'm proud to say that we are a people that adapt. We are a people that have struggled through many things. And when I say we, I mean we young people. You have to understand that irrespective of whether you think you are successful or not, whether you think you matter, brother, sister, somebody looks up to you more than they look up to me. People look at me and they say, oh, he's an adult. Man, what is he gonna tell me? He's not living in the same problem I'm living in. You might think you're 14, 15, 16, and nobody looks up to you. You might think, oh, I'm ugly, I'm a loser, no. But somebody, some 7-year-old, 9-year-old kid thinks you are fucking Superman. And pardon me for cursing, but sometimes you just have to add a, look, so you ignorant niggas hear me. Shout out to Lauryn Hill. What's difficult is that the problem children have in trusting adults is that we're not always honest with you. Because we're willing to tell you about all our successes, but then we get quiet as hell, not so much as a mouse fart when it comes to talking about our failures, right? About our broken hearts. When's the last time your teacher said, hey, these are all the classes I failed? I had straight A's, why can't you have them? Tell me about the time, I don't wanna hear about the time you got straight A's. I wanna hear about the time when you got stood up at prom. That tells me more about your character. I want to hear about that time you got your heart broke when someone lied to you. I want to hear about all those times in which you were absolutely broken and disgusted. I want to hear about that time, the first time somebody called you the N-word or told you you were a wetback and how you dealt with that. I don't want to hear about the simplicity of math and science. Our people invented that. It is easy, and some people realize and they think to themselves, easy? No, it's not. Yes, it's just about believing in yourself. It's the same way to conquer fear. Oh, fear is so inevitably overwhelming. You know how you combat fear? Remember to breathe. What? Fear. It's the same thing as ghosts. I came to my little cousin's room. Oh, there's a ghost in the closet. A ghost? Really? Is it a demon or a ghost? What kind of phantasm? So a 6,000-year-old Sumerian demon, one of the devil's lieutenants, is hiding in the closet here. And he's been defeated by a 20-watt light bulb. What a powerful demon. Scary guy. Belief, and your belief is especially powerful. So when you lack the belief in the people that you're teaching, and this message isn't for the kids, it's for the adults. When you lack the belief to look in their eyes and tell them your failures, it's you who are failing, not them. I'm not successful because I succeeded. I'm successful because I failed more than other people were willing to try. That makes success. When someone tells you, hey, you're not smart or you're not gonna do this, or when someone talks to you condescendingly, because sometimes people are passive aggressive. How many people have heard that phrase, passive aggressive? Good, and you understand exactly what I'm talking about when people ask for your failure in a different way. I don't know if you necessarily can do this, or this might be too much for you, or whatever the other case may be. And in reality, a lot of it has to do because you doubt yourself. When a person gets their heart broke or a person gets lied to, you have to understand that emotionally, they've been crippled. And I'll explain this. Imagine if I broke my leg. Imagine if I got hit by a car, right? My right leg is smashed into pieces. And I never went to a hospital because I lived in a very poor place and I never got it fixed. I wouldn't walk like a regular person here running around. I would walk like this. Now let's say I've been lied to. Let's say my community has been full of police that have been harassing me every single day of my life. I don't trust or show affection the way other people do. Yeah, let me show you some love and affection. I show love and affection like this. Only people can't see it because emotional damage is much, much more hidden than physical damage, and yet much more damaging sometimes. Now, a lot of people know that I'm a rapper or an artist, whatever you want to call me, MC. I wear all these titles the way the King of England wore crowns for other things that he never really visited. The purpose is that, to me, hip-hop was more than entertainment. It was a revolutionary art form. That's what I believed in. As a revolutionary, I hold myself to a different degree. I don't look at myself as a liberal or a progressive. Those people want reform. My ideology is based on the fact that the system was never designed for certain people, and therefore the system has to be broken and reconstructed if it's going to serve all of the people. The system was never designed for you. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that are kept out of history so that we never have these discussions. For example, when we talk about immigration, let me be plain honest with you. When you meet Irish, Italian, Greek, Eastern European Jewish people, a lot of these people, their families struggled very hard when they came here. They were treated like absolute garbage when they first got off the boat and came to America. But remember, they did not just apply for citizenship. They applied to be white as well. Because in the early 1900s and late 1800s, if you were black or Latino of any country, Guatemala, Mexico, Peru, Puerto Rico, you couldn't join a union. You couldn't get a job with the police force and a job with the fire department. Now, this is news to some people. They just don't realize that other groups have had advantages that they've never realized that they've had. And I realize this because as a man, I've had advantages over a woman that I've never realized I had until some well-meaning woman smacked me in the back of my head and said, hey, you have advantages you don't even know you have. I said, what are those advantages? They said, when's the last time you checked behind you when you were walking through a parking lot late at night because you were afraid somebody was going to rape you? I said, never. Shit. When's the last time you worried about someone then getting that person off by saying that you were wearing clothes that were too provocative so it wasn't their fault? I said, that's never happened to me. So in all humility, if I must accept these things, and they are to do with a part of my humanity that I was born with, then how can people not accept the reality of what they had to do when they came to this country? After all, you see this building? It had to be approved by the fire department. They decided how many people could fit in this room, and the capacity is set in law. If you don't have that, they'll come shut you down. Oh, you want a building built? You need my stamp. That's political power. Oh, you want to run for mayor? Well, you're going to need the police chief, ain't you? And if we've been locked out of that since day one and sent to red line districts as so-called minorities when we really make up the majority of the world, then what does that say about where our focus has been for all this time? We haven't been realizing the reality of what the nation has showed us in terms of its history. It's important that we learn this history, that we learn about the Mexican Repatriation Act, when legal citizens who were here were decided to be removed and sent back to Mexico because the United States was going through the Great Depression. Not that they weren't citizens. Many of them had served their country in the same way that there are people who have served this country, who have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. These aren't wars that I agree with. You know, the premise of these wars I find ridiculous. But if you're willing to stand and fight a post, how can you be deported from the place that you defended? Meanwhile, someone that never did anything for this country except fall out of a hole in Kansas somewhere comes and says they have more right to that land than you. It's also important that you learn the reality of history because the people that oppress you want you to never confront that. Now, it's hard to read history because sometimes you want to interpret facts to support your own conclusions, but that's poor science. History is not going to always tell you nice things about your people. It's not going to say you all lived in peace like the Garden of Eden before the Spaniards showed up. No. But then again, if you steal a pound cake from a street, you don't deserve to be gunned down in the street by the cops. They're not judge, jury, and executioner. They're public servants. The problem is that you've always thought and you've always said, hey, they serve us because we are the people, we pay their tax dollars. Yes, you are the river of money, but you are not the dam that controls the flow of the money. I'm a person of so-called Latino origin, and I want to speak about this a little bit more. My native language is not Spanish. Yo hablo español perfectamente, algunas veces castellano, pero cuando yo estoy con la gente dominicana que está en Nueva York, entonces yo hablo bien rápido y ahí está. Mierda para ti si no te gusta eso. You know how we have two different Englishes too, right? We got the one that we speak, yes, Mom, I was a perfect student today. Oh, I would never think of cutting school. Oh, yeah, we out of here, man. Don't tell her nothing, man. I have an indigenous background. That means that my people were here for thousands of years, okay? That means that when we had to domesticate animals, we didn't get that from a How to Domesticate Animals for Dummies book. We figured that out by ourselves. When we had to invent a language, we didn't steal it from somebody else and say, hey, let's think of new words. No, we had to do a lot of things by ourselves. And that self-determination, that belief in yourself is what's challenged. When you stop believing in yourself, you can't do anything. And to quote the great Malcolm X, as long as you can be convinced you never did anything, you can never do anything. When you look at history and you fail to realize that, oh, I'm not talking about black history. No, this is not black history. This is human history. That's what we're really talking about. If we want to talk about the first people, about Egypt and Sumeria, we're not talking about Jerry Seinfeld and Tim Robbins, no disrespect. We're talking about ancient civilizations that existed 5,000, 6,000 years before the birth of Christ. Think about how old this country is. You know that the Moors held Spain for 3 times as long as this country has existed. That's a very long time, but a short span, because we realize people make 5 to 10 year plans, right? Governments make 50 to 100 year plans. Empires plan ahead for 1,000 years. See, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. The people who run this society, they know more about human beings than you or I probably ever will in a lifetime, although we can try to achieve that. In other words, the people that advertise cereal to your little brother or daughter or son or whoever, they know what colors kids like more than others, what these colors influence in people. They understand how far a human being can be pushed. They know the exact temperature in which the human being will die at a freezing speed or boil in water. They know this because they've been studying people being tortured for hundreds and hundreds of years. They have a British manual for colonization that has no longer been allowed to be viewed by the public. If you Google British Manual for Colonization, you'll realize that within the British Manual for Colonization, it had several key points of arguments. It said, listen, you must introduce a new religion to the people. They have to look at the image of God and see us instead of themselves. One of the most damaging things would be to see God and think it's the most powerful image of perfection and see the image of your oppressor. Because then you're not only the physical, but now the spiritual prisoner of those people. It's also important that you learn about the reality of how religion then gets taken out of context. If I read the Bible, I can find so many things that God doesn't allow. And yet you're going to tell me that only one of these is now punishable by death and needs to be extrapolated out of society. It's important to realize that the Bible was compiled in 325 AD. Now, I know some of your family members are Christian. Believe me, my family members give me hell all day long about this. The reality is that when you want to talk about religion with someone, if you know a lot more about a subject than somebody, it's not a debate. You're teaching them something. Remember that, okay? So I'm going to teach the way I teach my family, and I'll say, listen, imagine if you had never lived in the United States of America, right? You never went to college or high school here. You never voted or worked or drove. You never drove in LA. You never bought any food at the store. You only read the Constitution, and that made you think you knew everything about America. What if a person like that never lived here, never experienced any of those things, came up to you with the Constitution from another country and says, I know exactly what's going on in your country? What would you think? You would think, man, you read a lot about how things should be, but apparently you don't know anything about how it really is. That's the problem when you've only read the gospel and you've never read the history of the religion. If you only know the words in the Bible and you don't know anything about the people that wrote them or where it came from, and this applies to the Quran or the Torah or any other historical document that's traced around religion, learn about the history of it. Ladies, if you start talking to a guy, and does it make a difference if he cheated on his last 6 girlfriends? Yeah. Fellas, if you're dating a woman or a guy or whoever, doesn't matter, and they find out that they're a liar and they steal from people, you're gonna trust this person? So why not learn the history of who and what you're dealing with as a government right now? Because right now you're in a relationship with somebody who's lying and stealing from you. Thank you. I want to say something important because I know we've talked about hatred and anger a lot and how we need to avoid those things. But I'm going to tell you something that's rather controversial. Hatred and anger isn't useless. Isn't that funny for someone to come up here and say to a bunch of kids that hatred and anger isn't useless? Hatred and anger is like dynamite. Dynamite's useless, but it's very, very dangerous. See, people don't understand that when they say, oh, you can never get ahead through hatred and anger, kids stop believing you because they look at the first person they can see on TV and be like, man, this person got everything they have because they're hateful and because they steal from people and because they're dishonest. So how are you going to tell me that there's no success in that? It's not that there's not success. It just burns a lot quicker than love and affection and truth. Those things last longer. They're buried deeper within a person. They go to the core of who they are as a human being. It doesn't matter what people look at you and say, right? Every single one of you in this room is going to have one person, probably dozens, come up to you. They don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They don't know where you come from. They don't know what you've been through. They don't know what your family's been through. They just look at how you look, and they'll say, oh, I know all about you and your kind. I know all about you and your people. And when you have no knowledge of self, you can't argue with that. But when you have knowledge of self and an understanding of your history, you can say, excuse me for a second, I don't need you to define me. You don't have the right or the ability to tell me who I am because I already know who I am. I know who my people are. I know what we struggled to get to this particular point. I know what my parents or my grandparents or whoever picked me up out of the dirt had to do to put food in my mouth and make sure that I got this education to tell you that you don't know who the fuck you're talking to. I want to say some last things. I want to thank Fidel and the rest of the staff that came here. I want to thank all of the teachers and the staff that know they don't have to be doing this. This isn't a financial reward for you guys, and I appreciate that. As a person who teaches in a prison as well with children, I understand their anger and their pain. You know, in the ghetto, the best defense mechanism is aggression and anger. Why? Because most people that lived in a poor area, a lot of them have been physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally, psychologically abused. And what is the best defense mechanism for them? They don't have a multi-million-dollar lawyer. So the best defense mechanism for a young poor person is anger and rage. They say, don't come near me. I'll fucking cut you. I'll hurt you. And when I see that in a human being, I don't think, oh, there's a big tough guy. I think, man, somebody really hurt this person. They're so scared to even let me get near them. They're so terrified that they won't even let good things come into their life for fear that they might turn into bad things. And that's something that you have to think about. When was there an opportunity where you turned away something good in your life because you were trying to shield yourself from the bad things? I tell you right now, I've turned a lot of good things away from my life. I've thrown a lot of good people out of my life. I've been a ruthless bastard, and I regret that a lot of times. Until moments like this when I can show you my personal failure, when I can open my heart and say, yeah, this is where my life fell apart and fell on the ground and broke into a million pieces. Yes, I went to prison, and I was stripped naked in front of people, and I was given a number, I wasn't given a name. I had to save a kid from almost getting violated in the bathroom. So I can't speak on other people's homophobia, but I can tell you where mine started. I can tell you that the first introduction that a lot of people get to gay relationships is unfortunately through the prison society. So why do you think Black and Latino people are more homophobic? Because white people have a higher sense of morality than we do? Or maybe because our first indication and our first experience with that in a lot of times is a prison system, and that's not a loving relationship. That's a predatory relationship sometimes, and most of the time in there. You have to look behind these things so we can get away from that hatred. So you finally can look at someone and say, hey, these are just two people that God created. How could I hate them for how they are? How could I have contempt for another human being when I have so many sins of my own? And when I look at my students and I say, hey, imagine if there were two people that couldn't have a child. How would you feel about them adopting a baby that didn't have parents? And they say, man, that's a great thing. These are really cool people. That's so beautiful. What if they happen to be gay? Then they might molest the child or do something. Okay, well, I know where that behavior comes from. That comes from the homophobia from the prison system that has weighed down on our community for so many years, using us like batteries to power this country. It's hard to hear these things because you have to talk about yourself when you're up here sometimes. That's why people don't like public speaking, They're afraid they're going to slip up and tell people something that they shouldn't tell them about themselves. I'm not here to hide my failures from you people. I'm here to tell you that a lot of times we as adults are afraid of showing those things to people. You're not the only one that's afraid. But being afraid is not being a coward. Being afraid is the doorstep to courage. Being afraid is what makes you brave. You cannot be a swimmer if you're not in the water. This is not swimming. I'm standing in the air waving my arms. When you get thrown in the water and you start moving, that's when you're swimming. When you're afraid and you choose to confront your fear instead of lash out of cowardness, then you understand what it is to be brave. And remember, only a fool thinks that only a man is a warrior. Women have been some of the greatest warriors that our people have had over these years, and they've been forced to suffer twice as much as we've had to. I know we have to wrap it up, so I'm going to end with a short story. Now, in the first civilization that ever existed, mind you, I'm going to take you on a little trip for a second. The first civilization that ever domesticated animal and taught people metallurgy was called Sumeria, right? It existed where modern-day Iraq is, the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And these people believed in a certain religion, the way that you either believe in Christianity, Islam, or if you're Gnostic, or whatever it may be, Buddhism. What's interesting about this is that these people believed that this society, we, human beings, and they believed in this the same way we all believe in any religion, they believed that this society came about artificially. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. You can go to a library, it's still free, and look it up for yourself. They believed that once upon a time, this planet was populated by two species of higher beings, right? One of them was called the Ajiji, and the other, the Enlil. The Enlil were the older gods, the big homies. They ran the show. They told everybody what to do. And they told the lesser gods, who were still very powerful creatures, they said, yo, you're going to mine these minerals for us. And in these holy books from the Sumerians, they tell of a great rebellion, that one day even the gods got fed up with one another. And the Ajiji rose up against the Enlil and said, we will no longer be your servants. We will no longer slave and give our children to you in bondage. We will rise up, the entire planet of us, and we will overthrow you and burn your bodies. So what did he do? When the Enlil was confronted with this, they went to their supreme god called Lord Anu, who in the ancient times, this is also, let's be very clear, 6,000 years before the Bible was ever written, compiled. They called him the Lord of Heaven, the King of Kings. And they went to Anu and they fell down on their knees and they said, please save us. These people are oppressing us. They stole our children and they forced them to go in these holes in the ground and dig out metal. How could they do this to us? You're our father. Why would you let other people hurt us like this? And Lord Anu saw his children that were in pain and in tears, and he brought them to them and he said, you know what? I'm going to solve all your problems, the older gods and the smaller gods. I'm going to take a small creature from Earth, one of these monkey creatures, and I'm going to mix him with my DNA, and I will create a creature that within its soul will always strive to worship something better than itself. And then you gods won't have to fight anymore, because the human beings will do all the work for you. That is their creation mythology. That is what they wrote down to explain how human beings came to be. In the same way that when you read the Bible, it says that God snapped his fingers and we showed up, or that someone was made out of dust, or they got pulled out of a rib. Sorry. Remember something. Write your own story. Write your own truth. There was a young lady that came up here and talked about a beautiful array of things within the scope of poetry. Write your own story in a poem. When you write your own story, you become the god of your own universe. And I'm not saying this to be blasphemous. I say this with all humility. You can create all the rights that you wanted to wrong. And when I tell you this, it's not because I want you to be the best creative writer in the world. I'm telling you this because a negative mind can't produce a positive life. You have to, if you want to be wealthy, you have to imagine wealth and put yourself in the picture, as KRS said. As long as you consider yourself unhappy, how can you be successful? When being successful is being happy. If you're not happy, you're not successful. I got all the money in the world, but my mother's dead, and I got no kids, and I'm alone, and what do I do, huh? Swim in money? I'm starving, and the government has fallen, and there's no food or water or milk. Am I gonna eat this? Write your own story, ladies and gentlemen. Write your own stories. Because if you don't, and I'm gonna end with this, if you don't write your own stories, someone else will write your story for you. Thank you.
My man. Big ups.